Hello. It's hot in Korea today. The summer has started, so the summers here are kind of hell as far as humidity and the heat. So I've been thinking the last week or so about spiritual progress, uh, and this is something that, in some form or another, I think I've thought about through my whole life. I would say that I'm a very spiritual person, more than some people I meet. Um, and I don't really get a chance to talk about my thoughts on this very often because it's just not something that comes up in small talk or daily conversations. And I can probably count on one hand the people in my life that I've been able to discuss this with. But it has been a long journey, and I've been thinking a lot about my progress lately, if I've made any progress. It's sort of a one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. But I think the main thing that I've realized is it's all about overcoming desire. And in my 20s and 30s, I had spiritual awakening, which I detail in many of my other videos. But I started learning more about ceremonial magic and ritual magic and chaos magic, mainly to just learn more about my own spirit. And I think it served me well then, but it also caused me some problems here and there. Mainly because a lot of that kind of thing has to do with the will and the power behind the will. And sometimes if your will is too strong, you can disrupt or break a lot of things along the way, I guess. And the other thing is a lot of that is more egocentric. So, I mean, the first thing that I kind of got into that made me sort of break that egocentric pattern would be Rosicrucian thought, Rosicrucian philosophy, which is a form of mystical Christianity. And I did a lot of studying on it. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a Rosicrucian, but a lot of what they stood for I agreed with, and I found a certain synergy, I guess, with it. So through that process, I think my awareness became deeper because of some exercises that are used in ceremonial magic and ritual magic. One being the Kabbalistic cross, and the other being the lesser banishing of the pentagram, and also the middle pillar. You can find these exercises online quite easily. But as I used those things more, I realized more and more that my thoughts could direct my reality, I guess. But maybe in a way where it's like a play with the universe. And a lot of that happened through using thought forms, which I talk about in some other videos on this channel as well. But eventually, I started to get out of that. I think mainly when I moved to Asia, I started thinking more in my 30s and 40s about Stoic thought and Taoism. And a lot of that has to do with letting go, which is almost the opposite of ceremonial magic in a way. There is a certain letting go in like using sigils where you sort of define your desire and then you forget it after, to kind of push that out into reality. But I think in the Stoic Taoist way, it's maybe one of the hardest things to do is to let go. And so I'm going to read a few quotes that have influenced me in this regard, and I think it's quite difficult, so maybe if you stick with me in the video, you might get some insight. I'm going to start with a quote from Marcus Aurelius about desire, and it's from his Meditations. Either the gods have power or they do not. Now, if they have no power, why pray? If they do have power, why not pray for their gift of freedom from all worldly fear, desire, or regret, rather than for the presence or absence of this or that? Certainly, if the gods can cooperate with men, they can cooperate to these ends. But you might say, the gods have put these things in my own power. Is it not then better to use your own power in freedom, rather than show a servile and supine concern for what you cannot control? And who told you that the gods do not help us even to the ends which we lie within our own power? At any rate, pray about these things and you will see. One man prays, how can I sleep with that woman? Your prayer is, how can I lose the desire to sleep with her? Another prays, how can I be rid of that man? You pray, how can I stop wanting to be rid of him? Another, how can I save my little child? You, how can I learn not to fear his loss? And so on. Give all your prayers this turn and observe what happens. I think there's a lot to unpack there. It is maybe the hardest thing to do those things, to reframe what you want from life, because we all want things. We want love, we want food, we want power of some kind, or respect. I think the more that you want these things, the more it leads to disappointment, and the more disappointed you are, the more angry you become in some ways. So the letting go is actually letting go of the result. And when you're doing a sigil or something, that's part of the process. So in some ways, ceremonial magic and Stoic and Taoist thought are kind of connected in that way. But I think the difference is that in the sigil making and the magic, it is all about the desire of wanting an outcome. Whereas this, you're sort of removing the outcome. Now, you might say, well, does that make you sort of inhuman because nothing would affect you if you mastered this? Well, maybe, but I also think it might keep you very much in the present. And the more in the present you are, the more you can actually experience life, and maybe your awareness would increase. The next quote is from Rufus, and it's about control. He's a Stoic philosopher, and I think a lot of this is about reframing your outlook. So here's the quote. We must concern ourselves absolutely with the things that are under our control and entrust the things not in our control to the universe. This is quite wise. I think there's a need to want to think that you have a certain amount of mastery over your own life, and maybe the true master is the person that has given up on trying to master their life. But that's like an awful lot of trust. I don't know very many people that have that much trust in the universe or in reality. In fact, I would say most people doubt it. That's one reason why so many people have giant savings accounts and retirement plans and insurance, is because they don't trust the chaos of reality to sustain them. How you build that maybe is, it's almost like trying to push your way out of a box, let's say, and you maybe take a little punch or a little step further and further outside of what you consider your everyday awareness or reality. And so eventually, maybe if you push far enough, that will create a bigger box, and then you can have more trust and let go more. The next quote is by Lao Tzu, and it has to do with action versus inaction. Who can make the muddy water clear? Let it be still, and it will gradually become clear. Who can secure the condition of rest? Let movement go on, and the condition of rest will gradually arise. Those who preserve this method of the Tao do not wish to be full of themselves. It is through their not being full of themselves that they can afford to seem worn and not appear new and complete. So you have to let the mud settle in the water. And a lot of that is about not disrupting the water. So there's a certain amount of action and inaction in that. The mud has to come down, so that's an action, but then the water has to sort of stay still. If the water moves, then the mud doesn't go down. So I think this has a lot to do with art and practice, and about trying to refine yourself and to gain control of these desires, which is very fucking hard to do, excuse my language. You have to be almost brutal with yourself and have very strong sort of self-awareness or self-analysis going on. And I think that that's hard for a lot of people because we all have weaknesses that we don't want to see. Some more than others, I guess, but we all do. And when these weaknesses get in the way of your spiritual progress, you have to decide if there's something that you want to hold on to, or do you let them be the mud that settles. In my early adult life, like most people, I had many vices, and I still have plenty of them. But there are certain ones that I've tried to gain some control over, and I think when you're young, you just kind of go with it, and you're like, okay, whatever, I'm having fun. But you don't really see how that affects your spiritual progress. But I think once you start taking some responsibility for it, maybe you can gain some kind of the right word isn't improvement, but with stillness, I think you can hear more, if that makes sense. The final quote is also by Lao Tzu, and it has to do with the master does nothing. The master doesn't try to be powerful, thus he is truly powerful. The ordinary man keeps reaching for power, thus he never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more are left to be done. The kind man does something, yet something remains undone. The just man does something, and leaves many things to be done. The moral man does something, and when no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves and uses force. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. Therefore, the master concerns himself with the depths and not the surface, with the fruit and not the flower. He has no will of his own. He dwells in reality and lets all illusions go. So this is mostly about forcing things, and it's okay to trust in outside forces, I think. Everything will be okay, really. If there's an afterlife, let's say, you'll get there, hopefully. If it's some kind of higher state of consciousness, then that's what will happen. But I mean, I think the last few years have taught a lot of people about facing their mortality. And you know, this quote has a lot to do with that. I think it's more about how there are things in the depths that are beyond your control. Your subconscious and the collective unconscious. Then there are things on the surface that you are more aware of, your own will and your own skills, I guess. And the difference between the fruit and the flower. I mean, the flower is beautiful, but the fruit is what sustains, and it also is what plants seeds for the future. So I mean, in some ways, and I think this has a lot to do with being a creative person. Whenever I'm making something, I'm not necessarily thinking of right now. I'm in the present, but I'm also sort of thinking of what kind of seeds this plants for the future. If it's a book I'm writing, I'm wondering how it might live on past my own life, or if it's a piece of art, maybe I'm trying to figure out something in my subconscious, and it's once I make the art, it becomes its own seed, and then maybe a year down the line, I sort of realize what my subconscious was trying to tell me. So I think, in some ways it's good to let the art sort of speak for itself. And when I mean art, I mean anything. I mean cooking, dancing, just being present. I think we all have a problem being in the present and doing things like cooking, or even your job. Your job often seems like something you don't want to do, but if you can look at it as play and try to be as much in that moment as possible, it can actually be quite productive. So one great thing I think is letting go of your will. If you really want something and you keep grabbing for it and it slips through your fingers, what does that accomplish exactly? It just makes you disappointed, and maybe you end up destroying or disrupting a lot of things around you in that case. So I think by following the river, sort of following the water and the current, and letting go of what you want, and maybe just be trusting of what the universe might deliver to you. And by doing that, I think the illusion of your own ego might, I wouldn't say go away, but at least you'll get to a point where you're causing no harm. I think that's the main thing. Because most things that involve the will have some kind of harm, I think, eventually. In my life, the things that have maybe mattered the most happen quite naturally. And as much as I tried to make them happen, usually when the things that really matter were things that happened when I least expected. So I think that's all I got for today. Anyway, have a good day, and if you're in a summer climate, I hope you're not as hot as I am right now. Anyway, take care.